How do you feel about sex toys? How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? Making up a story, you get the story from them, right? And then the next step for me would be to interview that person with the mother and see,
And welcome to the Sit Down, where we have conversations with creators from across this beautiful motherland of ours. My name is Makomboe, a filmmaker and an all-round story lover. And today we are sitting down with Godisamang, who is an amazing filmmaker who makes documentaries. And she's the owner of Mogale Pictures, an activist at heart. And she uses film to communicate bravery, feminism, and the Pan-African movement. Should I say it? Sit down and settle in.
Why do you take away my right to decide what I do with my body? Because you want to, settle a score? You want to just have fun? Take what you feel you're entitled to? And then how must I deal with that?
All right, so I want to start off by saying thank you very much for joining us on this session, where we go deep into your craft and into your artistic senses. Who is a documentary director and what does it take?
What does it take? I think it takes a good team. You need a good team behind you, a team of good people, not just technically, not just a good DOP and a good sound person and a good this and this. You need a team that believes in you and in what you're doing. I think the support of a team is something very, very underrated. Yeah. And you need strong characters. You can have a strong story, but you need very, very strong people in front of the screen. I think that's what makes a good documentary. Something that we've often talked about is the fact that the people in front of the camera, the people that you are shooting are not passive. They are people and you are filming their lives. So be open to their input as well, because it's really such a collaborative effort, and we don't talk about that enough.
Yeah. And, part of the podcast we were talking about that when it comes to documentary, unlike film where the director is God, I usually translate that and say in documentaries, the director is playing servant.
Wow.
How do you translate that? How do you let go of the need for control, or how do you manage the unknown when it comes to documentaries?
I think sometimes you can get swept away because there's so many things. So you have to kind of know what you are there to look for as well. As much as you are not holding on to the creative control, you must be certain of what you're there for. Don't get swept away by all of these other things. So as much as there's all of these things happening, you are in charge of kind of finding what you are, even though you don't have the creative control. I think that's the only kind of control that you have is staying on track and keeping your team on track, and not getting swept away. Yeah.
And I think you're almost provoking me to ask, and I'm imagining myself as someone who potentially, wants to direct documentaries and wants to sort of find a beginning, doesn't know where to start. How do you start? How do you find the story that you want to tell? And how do you tackle it? How do you approach them? What's the process of finding the story to, shooting it? What is that like? How do you know what's interesting?
I think it starts with me. If I'm truly interested, then I will find it interesting. So, and then I start with talking about it and saying, listen, I really want to make this. And it's a strange thing with the universe is when you start, the moment you tell yourself, okay, I'm starting, then it opens up. I remember thinking last year, I want to really make this film about the Rain Queen. I've never seen the Rain Queen. I've never been to the kingdom. I've never been to the dynasty. I've only read up about it. And then I just go to a film screening and the filmmaker knows the Rain Queen and has access to the royal family. This is a woman who is believed to have mystical powers to actually make it physically rain. You have inner conflicts within the royal family. You have the subjects, you have the leaders in the family. But you are there for the sexuality. Like you said, when you're a servant, like it's such a spiritual thing to be creative and have stories, and the universe will help you make it. So the moment that you decide, listen, I want to make this story, it will happen. It will happen. Like if you need access to something, it will come.
Coming in from like a fictional perspective, I remember one of the things I never liked in university, when I thought I was purely going to be a journalist and write. And everything they kept saying was like, oh, you need to write fact. And I thought, oh my God, can't you just write something fictional in these stories? Can't you just change them a bit, give a twist here and there? And I ask myself the same way. How do you know that this story is worth investing the time in, knowing that you do not have the power to change it later? Like whatever you start shooting, you only record what you can be given, and like fiction where you can make twist it here and there. How do you know this is worth taking that journey?
How do I know it's worth it? I don't know. How do you ever know? You just take the risk. You just take the risk.
Is there like no pointers of like, oh, maybe it's like an interesting character or an interesting path? Is there no like signposts or something you can tick off the list to sort of know, okay, this is interesting?
You know what I do? Once I find a character, I make a questionnaire for them. I compile a questionnaire of all the things that I want to see in the film, right? Yeah. So I'll say something like, how do you feel about sexual pleasure? Yeah. And then you tell me, have you had the conversation with your mother? Have you been influenced by religion? Yeah. Do you feel guilty when you have sex before marriage? Yeah. How do you feel about sex toys? How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? Instead of making up a story, you get the story from them, from just asking. Yeah. And it's just a piece of paper. Yeah. And now you know. That, okay, this person has never had a conversation about sex with their mother. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And then the next step for me would be to interview that person with the mother and see, and say, okay, let's have the conversation and see, what happens, and you don't realize as a filmmaker, when you get into things, the preconceptions that you have about people. I remember when I found this Nigerian character. He's a woman, 60 years old, in a polygamous marriage in rural Nigeria, in Akure. So what I immediately think is that this woman is conservative.
How did you even find them all the way in Nigeria?
I have friends from all over the world.
You are Pan-Africanist at its core.
My friend, he went to school with me at AFDA, but he's from Nigeria, and he went back to Nigeria after school, and he wrote a book. Yeah. And he sent me the book. And it was about his grandfather and his 5 wives. And I read the book. It was such an excellent book. It's called Kasali's Africa. So he sent me the book and I read it and I was like, Faye, I love this book. This is polygamy a common thing in Nigeria? And he told me, yes, it's very, very common, especially in rural parts of Nigeria. Yeah. And I was like, you know what? I'd like a character in Nigeria. Yeah. And he found me like 3 women. Yeah. And he's like, okay, this one is married to a chief. This one is this one is the 3rd wife. And I chose one character. Yeah. And from reading Facebook, I think she was like one of the women that I read about in the book. Like for sexual pleasure, she'll say that I believe that it was ordained by God that both parties should enjoy sex.
Oi.
And it was just blow me. And I was just, when I met her, when we shot in Nigeria last year, she's this incredibly elegant woman. May her soul rest in peace. She passed away in January.
Oh my gosh.
She had cancer, but her daughter will be taking over. she'll still be in the film, definitely.
Yeah.
But you see this relationship that she has with her daughter, and how sex positive she is, and how much she regrets being in a polygamous marriage, and just the suffering that comes with it was something that she wanted to warn her child about. And just these interesting things that you find out from these questionnaires, like all of the things that you're curious about, all of the things that you want to see in your film, ask the character about them and see what they have to say about them. That's where the direction of your story goes without you writing someone's story for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes 100% sense. So you have an idea, you have a structure, finding an interesting character, and you sent them the questionnaire, so you have a sense. It's almost like you're casting, in a way. It's almost like you're casting.
Yeah, so you have a sense of what type of person that you're dealing with. It's not a complete surprise.
Yeah.
And you spend a lot of time with these characters. You know them. So there are things that you will speak about with these people off camera.
Yeah.
And then bring them back into camera. I think a thing that I was warned about was the fact that when you make films and you are getting close to your characters, there must always be that barrier, so that they don't feel like they told you something in confidence and then you are bringing it onto the character. Because the moment that relationship is hurt, it's a problem. So there must always be a clear, even if someone is telling you something in confidence, it is your responsibility to let them know that you would want to use it in the film, instead of putting on a camera and then surprising them and saying, oh, when this happened, how did you, the trust relationship between a director and a subject is a very, very fragile relationship that you need to take care of.
You slept with me, but I don't remember. So you were feeding me alcohol to violate me. Why? Why do you take away my right to decide what I do with my body? Because you want to, what, settle a score? You want to just have fun, take what you feel you're entitled to? And then how must I deal with that?
So the first question is, how did the film come about? How did the idea come about, before we move into the more important question that I want to ask about vulnerability and how you dealt with it? Just to give the audience a sense of the history of it.
Okay. So it started with an injustice that was brought to my attention that now gave birth to this idea of Black women and the tension, like the tension between Black women and the politics of sex.
For such a sensitive conversation, how do you approach the characters, and how do you maintain the vulnerability and the ability for them to not only open up to you, because it's one thing to open up to you, but to open up to you next to a camera? And I think that's a whole other level. How do you manage that? How do you handle that as a director?
Something that was very, very important to me was making sure that my crew was on the same page with the story and with the character that we're dealing with. So as much as you can have a character trust you, the crew can mess it up by acting differently or making it uncomfortable for the character, and that is completely unacceptable to me. Like, if I'm dealing with a trans woman, I will call her she. Everyone here will call her she. No one, and I don't, and it's not something that I have control over. So I can't look over adults and say, how are they speaking about her? What are they doing? I have to make sure that I have good people on my team that understand what it is that I'm doing. And if there's anyone that I'm unsure about, I just don't have them on my team, because it's something that I can't risk. As much as that vulnerability is very important between the subject and the director, the whole team is here. The DOP is here, the sound is here, the editor is here, the assistants are here. That subject, that person has to be comfortable with all of us. And for that person to be comfortable with all of us, they have to be respected and be considered and be treated like as human and with dignity by everyone, not just me. When you are vulnerable with your about yourself, you give other people permission to be vulnerable as well. Yeah. So if you are willing to open up and say, this is what I've experienced, this is why I want to make this film, what from my side it's this, then you slowly build that vulnerability.
And I think that's one of the hardest things. I think even I, coming from a sense of having spent a lot of time sort of making docus in a way more than anything else, I personally struggle with the idea of, when you're shooting or in the process, there's like a different mark. There's like the creator mark, and then there's the you mark. And most times you want to switch off the camera and go back to the normal you and not carry all that weight or all those conversations or what your character presents. How do you help a character understand this? I find that one of the most difficult things.
It is. I think the lines between that kind of relationship and friendship are very, very close and very, very blurry. That's what I'm saying. You just have to be careful with it. Don't do things unnecessarily. Like,
what do you mean? Don't do things unnecessarily?
Like, don't just I don't know, like, because you're bored on a Saturday night, you want to hang out with someone.
Was that a different experience? When you're shooting a documentary with characters, and there's a process of making the film, and at that point, after a while, they get used to you, and they're free to speak to you, but I always feel like there's a sense that a lot of characters don't actually know that this will be presented to an audience.
With Black Women and Sex, the docu-series, they were there a lot of the time in the audience when the film was when the docu was being shown, the episodes, and during the Q&A, they'd always be so emotional, like so defensive of what the reaction is. So if someone would say, I don't know, like I remember we were dealing with rape, for instance, and when you talk to someone about being sexually violated, you don't consider the fact that someone could say something to invalidate what you said. I think that's where the shock comes from, is that you tell your story and you don't consider how people will react, and you don't have any control over how people react. Sometimes it can be just so upsetting. I think really the shock comes from the fact that when you say something, you say it with the expectation that people will take it a certain way. And when people don't take it a certain way, you get upset, or you get defensive, or you feel some type of way. So I think it's just something where you just have to really prepare yourself and prepare your characters, maybe when you start getting into showing the film and showing it to a larger audience, that you don't have any control of how people will react to this.
It's one of those things, eh?
Yeah.
It's one of those things. And I think that for me is where I want to end this and say thank you so much for having such intense, intimate conversation about the difficulty of documentary filmmaking. It's one thing to have the power to change everything when you're making fictional films. It's a whole other thing to manage and balance the reality that comes with documentary filmmaking. So I'm glad you're able to share a lot of that information. In case someone has a question, in case they want to send a shout out and they want to take a similar journey as you, is there a way that they can reach you?
Yes, I'm at Miss Godi, Miss_Godi on Twitter, and G_Kuno on Instagram.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Godi, for
thank you so much for having me. I had such a wonderful time.
Same here. Thank you so much for watching, and remember you can catch a more in-depth conversation that I have with Godisamang in our podcast, link in description. See you on the next one.